Well, Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO, joins us now. Ambassador, great to see you. You hear a lot of rhetoric coming out of Germany over the weekend with a meeting that they had there that NATO is united in this effort. I hope that's true, but certainly if it is, even if it is, it's not deterring Russia, is it?
No, it's not. Unity is good. I think there is a unified assessment of people in NATO that Russia is the aggressor here, that there's a real risk of war, that we should apply sanctions against Russia if they invade. We should support Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. But when it comes down to action, there's been no action taken to this point that is deterring Putin. He continues his buildup. He's orchestrating these provocations, as we just saw in the eastern part of Ukraine. The force levels are higher even than they were last week. And he's giving kind of a shrug of his shoulders about diplomacy or about talking with Biden later this week, or the Blinken-Lavrov meeting. It's like he's making his military preparations.
Well, Ambassador, I'm sure you heard the comments of President Zelensky saying, look, if in fact you have intel that the invasion is on, why not put on the sanctions now? Don't hold them back any longer.
I fully agree. I think we should be doing that. What Russia is doing already is unacceptable activity, taking 75% of its conventional capability, surrounding Ukraine with this, mortar strikes, sniper fire, bombing schools. This is already out of control, already too much military activity. We should be responding to this immediately.
And what about Russia? What about Germany and its relationship with Russia? We saw when the German chancellor came here, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, President Biden said, if Russia invades, we will stop the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I didn't hear that kind of direct statement from the Chancellor of Germany. Do you agree that he would go on and stop that pipeline that's so vital to his economy and Russia's?
We don't know that. And he was very careful, as you pointed out, when he was in Washington, not to say that. And also here at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, the Germans were very careful to say, we're not going to apply sanctions in advance, and we're not going to say what they are. Everything's on the table, so they say, but what will really happen? They don't want to be specific. They really don't want to sanction that pipeline, and we don't know what they will really do.
So if in fact if the invasion comes and Germany's forced to decide between NATO demanding an end to the pipeline and Germany saying, man, we're going to go with it, what do you think Germany will do?
Well, I think what Germany's going to try to do is find ways to stop the fighting, if there is fighting that's going on. And what they've done so far, they suspended the certification of this pipeline for 3 months. They could continue that suspension of certification until they get things under control again. That seems to be more likely to me. But as I said, we just don't know. That they're not being specific about what they would do. I
do want to ask about the Baltics, because unlike Ukraine, they are members of NATO, Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania. If, in fact, and Putin has said this, he said it in an article he wrote last summer, that, in fact, he has just as much, or Russia has just as much right to be involved in the Baltics than they do in Ukraine. What happens if the next stop is the Baltics?
Right. Well, we have made clear as the United States and as NATO that crosses a red line for us. We have to defend members of the alliance, because if we don't, then no one in the alliance is safe and NATO ceases to mean anything. So we have been clear. We've added additional troops to Europe, forward deployed, and so have other allies. So the French, Spanish, Germans, they have deployed forces to Romania, Bulgaria, Baltic states, Poland, as a way of signaling to Putin that don't touch these countries because they are members of NATO. The problem here is that this doesn't do much for Ukraine. Ukraine is still in the crosshairs, and these deployments are not going to be used to protect Ukraine.
And Putin is still acting aggressively.